Hi guys, it's Rashonda, and I'm here today with another graffiti art video. Today we are going to be doing the letter B, and I love doing individual letters. It's a great way to practice, experiment with different colors and backgrounds and different effects and 3D, which by the way, today is going to be a 3D video. So if this sounds interesting to you, then you should hang on and watch the video, and also don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to get notified of any future videos. So let's go ahead and go on over to the art studio and get started. So something that I like to do before doing some of my drawings, especially if I'm trying to do something unique and original and just kind of playing around with some different concepts and ideas, I like to do these full page quick sketches of something. So today, since we're doing a graffiti letter B, this page would be filled with a bunch of different style letter B drawings. So to do this, you can use a marker, you can use an ink pen, you can use a pencil, it doesn't matter. What you want to do is fill your paper up with as many quick sketches as you can. So for this particular sketching exercise, and by the way, this is a really good way to get warmed up and to get those juices flowing a little bit. I want to fill this paper up, and I want to do just the flow of the lettering. So just the actual line work of the lettering and not the full width. Like you don't want to spend a bunch of time on it. I mean, you can if that's what you want to do, but that's going to be the next step to doing this. So you can set a timer if you want. You could do 3 minutes, 5 minutes. You could fill the whole paper up. You could do it on notebook paper, a sketchbook. It doesn't matter. I just happen to have a box of this paper from when I used to do caricature drawings years ago. And it's just taking up space in my closet, so I use that. It's a little bit bigger. You don't have to use a big sheet of paper. It doesn't really matter. There's really no rules to this, except I feel like it's the benefit you get is when you do them really, really quickly. So for the letter B, because you have those rounded shapes up here, when you're doing your graffiti letters, you can do them rounded or you can do them completely squared off. So what you want to do is just do just real quick sketches. And we don't want to put all the details. We don't want to worry about all of that yet. That comes later. You want to get some ideas of the flow of the lettering. Do you want them to be a more bubble style letter? Do you want those really crazy kind of wild style type letters? And you want to think about, do you want these lines curved or do you want them straight? So many different ways that you can do your lettering, and the more you do, the better that you'll get. So you just kind of want to play around with, you can add, I wouldn't worry about erasing for this exercise. It's really just about getting the flow of the lettering. How do you want the flow to be? And it's up to you. So that wild style type lettering starts to get a little crazier. It gets to be where you can't really tell what the letter is exactly, and that's a specific style. I don't really do the wild style type lettering, but not that you can't. That's your own personal preference. It's just not what I do. But this would be a really good exercise to play around with doing something more like a wild style, something really crazy. Some nice free-flowing lines. But I think you get the idea here. So you just want to experiment with some different ways that you can do. Like, how many different ways can you come up with to do a letter B? You could do some curves. You could make them a little more fancy. You could do just some straight up bubble letters. Just tons and tons of different ways that you can do these lettering. And another thing you can do is play around with the idea of this upper piece being smaller than the bottom piece of this letter. You can play around with some different ways of extending the letter out. But I think you get the idea. So that's pretty much it for this. And then from here, you could choose one of these for, let me see if I can zoom out a little bit here. You can choose one of these ideas that you came up with on your paper here, or look at references on the internet or Instagram or however you want to do your actual letter. Okay, let's go ahead and get started on our graffiti letter B. Today, for this drawing, because I do want to make it 3D, I am going to keep the edges squared off and not do the rounded type lettering, just because it's easier to explain how to do the 3D. When you're doing 3D letters with rounded shapes, it makes it a little more difficult to line up and it's harder to explain it. So I think it'll be a little bit easier to explain by keeping the letters squared off. So that's what we're going to do today. To begin with, what I want to do, similar to what we did on that sketch exercise, and it doesn't matter if you chose to do that or not. Maybe you wanted to do it, maybe you didn't. Doesn't matter. We can still do this just the same. So what I want to do is just start out with a basic sketch of the flow of my letter, just to get an idea. So right away, I know I don't like that line comes straight across. I want it to go at more of an angle. So just starting to plan out how you want your letter to look. And then from there, we can start kind of just fleshing it out. And art is really just all about making decisions. That's all any artwork is. It's just a set of decisions that you make, and your decisions are going to be different from other people's decisions when they do their artwork. And that's where you come up with unique styles, unique designs. And you can erase as you go. I like this click eraser. It works really, really well for these small drawings, which, by the way, I should mention that I am doing this on an artist trading card. I love doing my drawings on artist trading cards because it allows me to, for one thing, get more drawings done in less time. So I get to enjoy more of that process. But also because I got tired of having stacks of drawings everywhere, which of course you already know when you're doing full size, like if you're doing your drawings in a sketchbook or some kind of full size drawing on a full sheet of paper, they can take a few hours to complete. Then you get them done and they sit in a sketchbook in a drawer somewhere or on a shelf, or they're just stacked up in a corner. And I kind of got frustrated with having piles and piles of artwork laying around. So now with the artist trading cards, I put them in a 3-ring binder in a portfolio, so to speak, like a little miniature portfolio. And that stays in the cabinet, and I have tons and tons. I don't even know how many fit in there, maybe 100 or so, depending on what size binder you get. But now I have a nice little portfolio for my drawings. So I went ahead and laid out how I want my letter to look. Some of these lines are going to be erased. So the next step is going to be, maybe I'll take that away so you're only looking at the drawing itself. The next step is going to be to outline the drawing, and I'm going to do that with a black Sharpie pen. You could also use a marker. These bullet point markers are thin enough, they work pretty well. I prefer the pen because it gives a sharper edge. The markers tend to bleed and make not necessarily a fuzzy edge, but definitely not as crisp and sharp as the pen. You do you. If you want to use markers, that's fine. If you want a really heavy, thick line, the pen is a little more tedious. It doesn't bother me. I'm good with using a pen for the outline and going over it a couple times. But since this is going to be a 3D drawing, I don't want to do a real heavy line first, but I will outline it and clean it up so everything's easier to see. And then we'll do the 3D effect. And then after that, we can go in and thicken it up if we want a heavier line. All right, so I'm literally just going to trace right over top of the lines that I want to keep. So some of these lines are extra. They were from my guidelines that I sketched out, which I think is an important step in the process. It gives you an idea of what the angles are going to look like, the size, the proportions of everything. But of course you can skip that and just draw out your shape of your lettering. It's up to you. It's just a personal preference of the workflow that feels right to you. I believe that with art, you should always do whatever feels right to you. If something doesn't feel right or look right, then don't do it. You should always do whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you think looks right, because that's how your own style's created. And of course you want to enjoy what you're doing, so you don't want to do something a certain way just because somebody recommended it. So now I'm just cleaning up the pencil lines. I'm using this black eraser that I had. I don't even know where it came from. You can also use the pink erasers. Again, personal preference. Do whatever works for you. All right, so there goes the outline. And again, you can use a pen. We can thicken this up later. A lot of different options. You could do a different color if you want to do a different color. It's entirely up to you. So I am going to grab my ruler real quick and I'll be back to work on the 3D effect. All right, so I have a ruler. Any straight edge will do. You can use cardstock or some kind of heavy paper if you want. It doesn't really matter what you use as long as it's straight and you can run your pencil along it. I don't want my vanishing point to be on my artist trading card, because if I did that, all my lines would be going to this everything would be angling in towards that point, and I don't want them angled that way. So what I did was I made a dot right here. Well, hopefully you can see that, but know that that's where my ruler is going to be lining up. And then the one thing you want to do is, if you're making your vanishing point separate from your drawing paper, and sometimes you might want to do that even if you have a full a full sheet of paper, if you're using a big paper and you have your letters across the bottom and you don't have a lot of space at the bottom of your paper and you want your 3D effect going down, you're going to have to put your vanishing point somewhere off the edge of the paper. Everything's going to be too tight and it's not going to look right, unless that's the effect you're going for, of course. So the one thing you need to make certain of is that your drawing paper stays in the same place throughout. So if I have my vanishing point here and my paper's here, and then I move it up over here, it's going to throw everything off. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to line this up with the corners. And then I know that this artist trading card needs to stay lined up with the corners. And it doesn't have to be exactly perfect. If it moves just a hair, it's not really going to be noticeable. And then every line is going to go to the same vanishing point. And what I want to do is start with, I think it's easier to start with the obvious points and worry about the ones you're not 100% sure of later. So what I want to do is on this outside edge, these are going to be what I would consider the more obvious lines that I need to have. I'm going to line up my ruler with this corner, and I'm going to line it up with this vanishing point over here. And then draw a light line, because some of these are going to get erased. So now I'm going to go from this corner again to the vanishing point. And even though I know I'm going to erase some of these, I'll still draw them all the way through, and then we'll clean it up and erase some stuff later. So again, from this corner to the vanishing point, this corner to the vanishing point. So one thing you do need to be careful with, before you actually draw your line, make sure your ruler's lined up correctly. Sometimes it shifts a little bit. You get one point lined up and then the other one shifts. So just before you draw your line, take a quick look at both points and make sure everything's lined up. So I'm just literally going from each point to that same vanishing point, or each corner on my drawing. Now I'm going to go, there's a couple of these inside pieces, and I don't know if I'll keep this one. Sometimes when you get lines that are too close together, it can kind of muddy up your drawing, so to speak, and you may want to erase those. So this line, these two lines are pretty close. I could take this one out because this one is going to here, and we have this one here. If I wanted to, I could erase that one and not put it in there, and that would be okay. Because this one here, once we add the outline to it, they're going to run together. That's a personal choice. You can put them in there or not. So that's what I would consider the easy lines that need to be drawn. So now I'm going to go to the more complicated ones. So this corner here, we're still going to line up to that vanishing point, but you're going to stop when you hit this face of your letter. And then what you do to check, line up with your vanishing point in a corner, and if it just hits the face of your letter, then you don't need a line there. So most of these over here are not going to have anything because they go straight through the letter. Now for these inside ones, you're just going to do the same thing. Line up the corners with your vanishing point, and then look to see if it goes right through the letters. So like this one right here, you can see a little bit, but that's one of them that it's just going to make all the lines kind of blur in together. So we don't necessarily need to worry about putting those in there. So that would be it for all of our 3D lines. So the next thing you need to do is determine how, well, two things. You want to decide if you're keeping all these lines. So some of these that are close together, you could decide you don't want all those. These are okay here. If some of these were a lot closer together, I maybe would consider erasing some of them, like I did that one. I think erasing this line that went from here was a good choice. The next thing you want to do is decide how far out you want your 3D effect to go. I don't like how it looks when they go all the way off the edge of the paper. So I want to cut these off a little bit, and you can make them very thin, you can make them very wide. It just depends on how much depth you want your letters to have. So what you want to do is pick one of your lines that you have and decide how far do you want them to go. Do you want them wide? Do you want them narrow? And then when you cut the 3D part off, you want the angle to be the same as the angle for the face of the letter, as close as you can get. And when you're just eyeballing it, it's kind of hard to do, but it doesn't have to be completely perfect, so just do the best that you can. So you want to start with one line, keep these lines parallel so they match, and then you want to do a line connecting, so either this one or this one next. So this one's going to go back here, and I want to try to keep it as close to this line as I can. So these we want to be the same. And you're probably not going to get them perfect every time. And then I want to do the same thing here. So this is going to angle this way. And then you just want to keep working your way around. This line and this line we want to keep the same. Then this one and this one. This one. So this gets a little bit tricky because this line is gone. So we need to remember that this one needs to come out a little bit further from this line so that we have that shape coming out. Sometimes your lines, sometimes you can't go like this and following the flow of the letter. That's not always possible depending on the shape of the letter. So if you have to skip like we did here, then you just need to make sure that you keep these distances the same. You want those to be fairly even. So here, for example, we didn't have a line here, but this doesn't stick out as far as this does. So we need to bring that in a little bit. But it's definitely easier if you can go where your lines connect and then just follow the flow of that letter. So for the inside, we don't need to do anything with these. But if these openings were bigger, you would want to keep the distance the same as these other parts of your letters. So if this was real big and we had this line going through, you'd want to cut it off the same width as that. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's it for that part of it. Now we need to go ahead and outline this next part. So I'm going to use the same pen that I used before and just kind of double check and make sure you're happy with the way your lines will are looking. Everything looks even, the angles look okay. Like I said, it's really hard to get them perfect, but you want them to look convincing, I guess you could say. You don't want them to look too far off, because people are going to pick up on that when they're looking at your artwork, if they're too far off. But if you get them pretty close, and you can even freehand the 3D effects. I do that on a lot of my drawings. I'll just freehand it and let it just kind of be whatever it is. And as long as it's fairly close, then you don't have to worry too much about it. So now I'm going to erase again and remove all those extra lines. Clean up the eraser marks. And that is it for that part of it. So now we got everything outlined. We have our 3D effect. So the next thing would be to go in and clean up the outline a little bit, thicken up any areas that we want to have thicker lines, go over everything. And I will probably just go ahead and do that off camera. There's not much to it. It's just going over these lines. So you're literally just going to make these lines as thick as you want them. And again, you could use a marker if you wanted to use a marker, especially if you're doing larger drawings, or if you just prefer using a marker instead. Like I said, I just have always preferred using this pen. And the other thing you need to think about is which lines you want to be thicker and which lines you want to be thinner. Maybe you want them all to be the same if you want your lines to be consistent throughout. Again, that is completely just personal preference for what you like and what your style is. I don't think there's any right or wrong method for doing that. Maybe you like really thin outlines, and you could also do your outlines in a color other than black. I just prefer black. Again, that's part of your own style. You could do your outline in a color, maybe something similar to whatever your color theme's going to be. But one of the things with doing them on the artist trading cards, because they're quicker, and why I like doing these individual letters, is that it gives you a lot of opportunity to play around and experiment with different styles. If you're doing a full-size drawing that's going to take you an hour or two, or maybe even longer to complete, you're not going to want to take very many chances and experiment a whole lot, because that could mean ruining an entire piece of art. And also, by doing the individual letters, you're saving a lot of time, and you can just play around with some quick ideas that you might have. Different colors that you want to try, different backgrounds, because the whole thing with the graffiti art is you need to work on the whole composition with the letters and the color and the styles and the background and the different color combinations between the letters and the background. So there's a lot of decision making that goes into graffiti art, which is what really drew me to creating it in the first place. And you have to be able to try new things, experiment, work on your color combinations, work on your designs. And when you're doing those full pieces, it takes a lot longer. And I know for me personally, when I'm working on a full drawing that is going to take quite a bit of time, not to mention the expense of the amount of markers you need to use on it, I'm not really wanting to experiment a whole lot. But something like this that I can do in, 30, 40 minutes or whatever these take, and I'm not using a ton of resources and supplies to do them, I feel a lot more confident in playing around and experimenting on them. So I guess I'm not going to do that off camera. That's pretty much it for the background. You can keep working this as much as you want. As you darken up lines and you end up darkening up other lines, and it can be a never-ending process. So at some point you have to just stop, consider it good enough. I'm happy with this. So the next thing we need to do is add some color to the drawing. And I'm going to grab some markers and I will be back. All right, so I'm going to start with the 3D fill-in for this letter. And this is probably the simplest way to do it. There's a lot of different options for how to fill in the 3D effect. And you want it to go with your, whatever you're going to do for your letter. And then of course it needs to go with the background as well. So there's a lot of different decisions that have to be made. So what I like to do for my colors is I have these scrap pieces left over from when I cut out my artist trading cards, and I use those to try out the colors that I want to use. So this is a pretty basic, this is kind of my go-to fill-in for my letters if I'm not really, experimenting and trying new ideas out. So what I do is add in some black lines. And again, you want to keep them even with, or keep them parallel with your lines over here, the outside edges of your lettering. And all I'm doing is adding a variety of thicknesses. And I'm not doing them, I'm not keeping them consistent at all. I'm not doing like any type of a pattern or anything. I'm just adding in some lines. You can make the outline part itself a little bit wider. So I'm just putting some varying thicknesses just to break this up a little bit. You want to do the same thing on the inside, keeping all your lines parallel with each other. And if you want to add some lines in here, you have to keep in mind where, let's see, I gotta flip this around to get back to my vanishing point. So if I flip this around and I look, my vanishing point's here. So if I want to add lines in here, I need to make sure they go in the direction of my vanishing point. You don't want them being different from the rest of your lines. So you're just going to look around the different 3D areas and then fill some of that in with some lines. And again, you don't have to make any type of a pattern. You don't have to keep any of these gaps the same. I'm just going in and breaking up the big areas of the 3D part with just some simple black lines. You might have to vary your lines as you go towards the vanishing point, because you have to remember everything's angling in towards that vanishing point. So you may have to make them thicker or thinner so that the gaps in between these lines don't look off. That kind of depends on how much area you have in here. If there's a smaller area, sometimes it's not as noticeable. But just keep in mind that you may have to fix those gaps a little bit. So just putting some lines in there. So that's it for that part of it. I have the black filled in. And then if you need to, you can fix any outlines if you went out of the line a little bit. So for the markers, there's a lot of different ways to do the markers. There's a lot of different types of markers you can use. I don't like Sharpies, but I do have several of them. And the reason I don't like them is they have a very strong odor, and the odor bothers me. And it's harder to get the colors. Some markers, it's easier to get a good variety of colors. You can mix and match. So I have Sharpie, I have some Bic markers, and I have these touch markers like the black ones that I showed earlier. It doesn't really matter. I have Copic markers. These are very popular, but they're also very expensive. But you can mix and match the different markers that you use, the different brands. You want to make sure they're alcohol-based markers if you plan on blending any of your colors together. So if you're just doing solid colors, it probably doesn't really matter. But if you want to be able to blend your colors together, alcohol markers are what you want. And all these that I just showed you, of course, are all alcohol-based markers. So I am just filling in the spaces between the black with this peach color. Nothing complicated about any of this other than maybe trying to stay in the lines. The bigger the marker, the harder it is on these smaller drawings. The good thing about the alcohol markers, if you do go outside of your lines a little bit, you can actually remove some of the color. It won't take it all away, but you can remove some of that pigment and lighten it up quite a bit by using a colorless blender, which is, I'm assuming, just straight alcohol solvent. And you can put that on there and kind of scrub it, and it will pick up the colors. So, and you could do that maybe if you wanted to lighten your colors up a little bit. I haven't played around with it too much, but I have had where I go outside of the lines, especially when working small, and needed to use that to drop my ruler. Needed to use that to clean it up a little bit. So I apologize for that noise from my ruler flying across the room. Okay, so the next step is to color in the inside of the letters. But that is pretty much it for the fill-in part of it. So yeah, we'll move on to coloring the letter next. So for the inside of the letter, I decided to go with a couple of green markers. I tested them out on the paper. If you want to blend them, then you need to make sure that they're fairly similar. You want them similar but different enough that you can see that there's two different colors. Now again, there's tons of different ways to do this. I have a certain way that I color my drawings, whether it's graffiti or another type of drawing, a non-graffiti type drawing, is that I like to lay down my lightest color and then go over it with the darker color. And yes, I know that that uses up markers that It's kind of wasting, I guess, the marker, but it's the method that I like. I've tried doing it other ways and I don't like it. It doesn't feel right for me. So if this doesn't make sense to you to do it this way. Now, one thing you do need to keep in mind is that if you're going to blend your colors together, if you want a smooth transition, you do have to work while the alcohol is still wet. So you might need to work in smaller sections. Once the alcohol evaporates out of the paper, it won't blend the same. I think it probably won't blend at all. I've never really tried, but once that alcohol is not there anymore and it's evaporated, it's going to be really hard to get the markers to blend together. So keep in mind that you do need to work in small sections at a time if you want those colors to be able to blend together. And I think for this one, I don't think I'm going to blend these too much. I think I might just add in some designs in here. Break this up a little bit. Now you can use 2 markers, 3 markers. So I think what I might do is just add some bubbles in here and just break up this big blocks of color. And one thing I did want to mention is that when you're doing when you're blending your colors, you can, I'm not blending the colors, but if you were going to blend the colors, you would want to put your light marker down, then your dark marker, and then you can go over the edges with the lighter marker to blend them. Or you can use a colorless blender. That would work as well. But I don't like having these big chunks of color. You could add some lines in here. There's a lot of different ways that you could do this, of course. And again, doing the artist trading cards, or even if you don't want to do artist trading cards and you just want to work small. If you're not familiar with artist trading cards, I will put a link to our free artist trading card guide in the description box. And that explains what they are and how to make them, and gives a template for making your own blank cards to get the most out of a piece of paper. But I'm just looking at the areas that look too big. And again, this is all just personal preference. You might like those bigger areas, but just trying different ways and experimenting with ideas for how this can be broken up a little bit in trying to get away from those big areas. Like I said, I personally don't like the big sections of color. I like them broken down a little bit more and having something in there so that it's not just a solid block of color. That's my personal preference. Again, if you think this looks like I went overboard with the shapes on the inside, then do less for yours. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it or the right way to do it. So now what I want to do is add in a background. So for this background, I think I might actually do it black around the edges, which I normally don't do. And then I want to do some more bubbles, you know, little, I guess they're, I don't know what you call them, like paint bubbles. So I'm not sure how this is gonna look. I wish I had something a little bit lighter, But since I keep talking about experimenting and trying new things, I am going to try something different than what I normally would do. So you can't really tell on here, but these two colors, so I used the Sharpie before, and this is a Bic peach color. And this one's slightly lighter. I wish it was even lighter than what it is. And this is where you can run into some expenses and needing to go with different types of markers than what you originally thought you were going to, is the color differences. So it's really easy with your markers to find a color that's close to what you want, but not exactly what you want. And then your drawing doesn't look exactly the way you were hoping that it would look. So we'll put some paint runs down here. And again, there's just so many different ways you can go about finishing up your drawings. And I do think it is important to try out some different ideas and, maybe some things you wouldn't typically do. That's how we expand and grow and come up with different things, by getting out of our comfort zone a little bit. And oftentimes you'll discover things that you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. So I think it's always a good idea to try new things and to get out of your comfort zone. So I am going to fill in the rest of the background in black. And I want to do that with this black marker. But I think what I want to do is maybe outline it with this first. My instinct tells me I want to outline it with that first, but I think it's going to not look the same. I don't want the outline to necessarily show, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this marker. Again, the difference between the marker and the pen is that because the markers have alcohol in them, they saturate the paper. They don't saturate it necessarily, but the alcohol will soak in to the paper, which then allows the pigment to spread outside of the exact location of where you put it. Hopefully that makes sense, but because the paper is damp when you use the alcohol markers, and the more you work the area and go over it, the more it's going to dampen the paper, and it's going to allow those pigments to spread. If you're just going over it one time, it's not as bad. And one thing I did learn is that when you use the really cheap markers, and I'm talking like the craft store markers where you can get a set of like 60 markers for 20 bucks or something like that, 15 bucks. Those really they do saturate the paper. I learned that the hard way. These aren't too bad, but you do want to keep in mind that they have alcohol in them, so that's going to get into the paper and that's going to affect your drawing a little bit. So now I'm just going to fill in the rest of this, and this is a dual tip marker. So if this area was bigger, I could use this chisel tip to do it. And you get used to using the bigger tip markers. If you watch some videos of people who are really good at doing this type of work and they've done it a lot, you can see them using, I've seen people using a chisel tip to do really fine details. And I don't have the control to do that. So for me, I'd rather take a little bit longer, use the smaller tip, the bullet tip, and not risk, because you can angle this and get in here. And something like this isn't too bad. But again, we tend to do whatever keeps us in our comfort zone and what we're used to doing, and there's nothing wrong with that as far as your process that you're doing. I don't know that there's any big benefits to using one side of the marker opposed to the other than the time it saves you. I don't know that it will necessarily improve your art skills by using one side or the other. All right, so I think that's pretty much done. It is hard to get those nice crisp edges using the marker, but I think it's okay. Again, you know, it's a good idea to try some different things, stuff you wouldn't normally do. Now, one way that you can finish these up if you want, there's a couple things that I do. Sometimes I will use a white Prismacolor pencil. That goes over top of the marker really well. What I usually do is I use a white Jelly Roll pen to go over top. And I can go in here and add some more little bubbles in here with the white. That'll add a little more, some contrast to the rest of this. And of course you could use paint pens. I personally haven't used them a ton. You can put some highlights in here, which is normally what I do, but since I'm trying some new things out today and trying to do things differently, I think I'll not do that on this one. We'll just add some white in there, but yeah, so you can use paint pens. I've not had a lot of success with them. I don't know if it's because they don't do good on the smaller format, but I always end up with puddles of marker on there that I don't want. So I tend to not use paint pens, but paint pens will work. I like the Jelly Roll. It has good control. Maybe add some more lines in here with the white, just to keep that consistent. I think we're gonna call that done. So that is it for the graffiti letter B drawing with the 3D effect. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you next time. Happy creating! Well, that's it for today's video. Thanks for staying until the end, and I hope you gave us a like, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to get notified of future videos. Also, check the description box. There's a link in there to our graffiti course, which is great for beginners, and also a link to our free artist trading card guide. So, check that out. Look in the description box for some other goodies, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!